We finished this last trend talking about LLM and API and IA, so we'll have one full track today about that. But there is a sixth trend we did not mention especially, which is the sustainability aspect, the environmental aspect. And this is why we're glad to have Yannick Tremblais joining us to talk about the API Green Score. Hello, Yannick. How are you?
Hello, Mehdi. Thanks, and you?
I'm doing really great. Thank you very much. So it's true that you made an announcement, I think, last year about the API Green Score. You've done great work about thinking sustainability for your APIs and how to pilot that. This is why we really wanted to have you to explain what you have done and what it is and how can people join.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly the subject. So thanks for this stage. And so we'll start, we'll go deep dive in the API, numériquement responsable in French, and digital API responsibility. Thanks for the board to allow me this slot. So first, a few words about me. I'm Yannick Tremblais. I was responsible for the API platforms. And now I'm driving IT innovation topics for the Groupe Rocher, and I'm involved for the CSR initiative, particularly in the responsible for the digital practices. Groupe Rocher is for business sector for cosmetics with Yves Rocher and Arbonne, clothing, Petit Bateau, cares with Stanum and well-being. And we are presently near in 120 countries. Groupe Rocher adopted in 2019 the status of mission-driven company. Our mission is reconnect people to nature. So this mission-driven company allows commercial companies, should they wish to do so, to formally pursue one or more social environmental objective. And it's a part of our activity. So this concerns any mission of collective and general interest, for example, the protection of the environment, or the context of a local establishment. And this reason that is deeply rooted in our company's products, services, and experience, using the benefits of the nature to deliver well-being. But what is the objective of the link with the IT? So this missions, reconnect people to nature, is involved in 4 pillars for the Groupe Rocher technology solutions, the ICT teams. These pillars is green IT, how to reduce the carbon footprint of main CO2 emission sources, eco-design for our information system, so make sure that new technology and data were introduced are mostly productively and wisely. And we are talking API Green Score on this pillar. Responsible IT usage, so raise awareness for the Groupe Rocher employees about digital sobriety, support Groupe Rocher entities to integrate digital sobriety in their CSR, their corporate social responsibility policies. And the last one, IT for green, put digitizations at the service Groupe Rocher ecological transitions. In 2021, at the beginning of this talk, Mehdi talked about that, we participated to the Digital Challenge apidays. It was the second year they did that. And we won 2 prizes with two different teams. One for the hybrid integration platform, which includes the API platform, and the other one for the reasonable usage of data. It was a good challenge, very interesting. And following this challenge, I decided to join a collective in France to continue working about the eco-design for the APIs. This collective names API Thinking. It's more than 100 members company, French company, European company, and 180 active members. And we joined together to organize meetup, workshop, and provide some guide or grid like API Green Score. This French company is around different activity domain like bank, retailer, cosmetics, energy, insurance, travel, government. I stopped here. And they worked about governance, API governance, security, sustainability, ecosystem for the API. So what we discover in this and what we exchange during this collective, you are a lot of tools to measure your website, to measure your backend consumptions and carbon footprint impact, and some things about infrastructure, but nothing around how to evaluate the API. And with Julia Bra from L'Oréal, we decided to join forces in service of community because we are pioneer of API eco-design. And environmental impact is a shared concern. So with the collective API thinking, we worked in 2022 to create a guideline to produce some best practice, evident best practice sometimes, and provide a grid to calculate the evaluations of your API. And other companies have joined us, like transport, bank, insurance, and energy for this work group. And like said maybe at the beginning, we provide in December for the Apidays Paris the first delivery of our toolbox. It's just the beginning of the story. But before going deep dive for the API Green Score, some few words about key figure. Digital world is not immaterial, quite the contrary. It consists of computer, screens, smartphones, millions of kilometers of copper and fiber optical cables, and thousands of data centers and billions of phone chargers, and so on. And digital technology generally divides in 3 tiers: users, data centers, and network to connect users and each other and the data centers. ADEME, the French Environmental Agency, and ARCEP, the French agency in charge of regulation for communication, they provide in last March a report with they share some figures. The QR code gives you the link to this report. It's in English, and we've got one in French. And the most important tiers for the digital carbon is the device. This is the most important part for the device during the production of them. And in this report, they said without actions to limit the growth of the environmental impact of the digital technology, the carbon footprint could be tripled between 2022 and 2050. Individually, the equipment reduces the energy consumptions. If you take the 5G for the cellular, for the fiber, they consume less energy, but the usage increase. On 5G, you can watch easily a full video on 5K or 8K. And this report says we've got a lot of change about digital usage with the cloud gaming, with data, with AI. We just talked about ChatGPT, with robots, with Quantic, and we've got a lot of evolutions on the data center. For each of the game changer, APIs are often of the core of these components. I invite you to read this report. It's very interesting to have another overview. So now we can talk about API Green Score. What is it? It's a toolbox, a toolkit to assist in using the principle and advice. It's not evaluation grid like electronic equipment or vehicle. We use the same way, the same design, but it's not to compare company each other. It's more for your company, for your startup, for your education team. And we are indeed discussing about eco-design and eco-consumptions. So some rules can be adapted to your context. And if you are not agree with some rules, you can remove them. This decision was made to work on 7 domains to find the mindful metrics usable for the stakeholder. And there is also a focus of the technological aspect and the accessibility. It's also to be addressed. We don't start it, but we know it's important to have the impact for the social impact also. So we produce a grid to evaluate that, but it's very important to share the calculation rules with all API personas. API personas, what means own API owners, API consumers, and API developers. So users and developers. And there is no judgment on the quality of the deliverable. It's clearly a continuous improvement process. So if I give you some information about the domain, the objective is to have a focus of different subjects and help people to understand what is the goals for the roles at the end. So in the different domain, we can have the API lifecycle. I will give you more detail just the slide after. We are talking about the referentials of your API. We are talking about data exchange, information about the data also. It's a little bit different, but we've got some rules which talk on the data exchange and data. The architecture. And another domain is tools, infrastructure, and communications. I will give you more detail for the first one, but if you need more information, we can share at the end of this talk the support. And the communications, the most important, the reasons that I talk here today, because without any communication and without any support to explain that, it's very difficult to involve people. So if we go deep dive for the API lifecycle, each time we create a global card. And we said, what is the objective for this card? What is the description? So for the API lifecycle, we are talking about the consumer referentials. Who used the API, how many people, how many calls we've got by day, what is the release numbers, the versions of the API you've got. And if you've got an API gateway and an API portal, it's more useful to have that. But we can start with a simple Excel sheet or Google Sheet file. For the governance, for the API lifecycle, it's more for the API product owner, or if you've got it, a center of expertise for the API, COE. And how we can evaluate that, how we can at the end of the presentations about the logs. The objective is to share information with all persona, with all people. You've got some KPI, and when we produce KPI, we said, for example, what is the number of versions of API we've got on productions? We define the rules. It's a US 03, and we can use these rules to have more detail about, and it's used for the evaluations. And of course, we give some example because it's important for all API personas to understand what is the objective for the API lifecycle. Another example, it's about the data exchange. We're talking about the information exchange between two systems. What is the format? What is the size? We're talking about payload exchange. What is the pattern we used? We're talking about event-driven pattern. It is in this domain, we're talking about this kind of rules. Do you use some cache system? Do you use a process to retrieve information? And we'll retrieve other steps like governance who are involved by this data exchange. So we're talking about API product owner, application owner. How we measure this impact. If you got end-to-end tool for the observability, you can use it and share information with all API personas. And what is the KPI? Here you can see some rules like cache performance systems. And the last domain I will share you to give you a global overview about it, it's the data. Have you got naming conventions to create your API and your API design your schema? Have you got a modelization, a pivot format? Are you sure you've got a single source of truth for your data to avoid duplicate information, to avoid multiply the source of information and to have some false information sometimes or not up to date? And in the same way, we are talking about the data format. Which data format do you use? It's important to have reflections about that and just use a format linked to your habits. If you already do XML and you always use XML, perhaps is it the best way to use your API? It's not for a battle. I don't want to go in this path. Okay, I'll talk about 7 domains, but it's very difficult to have rules with 7 domains. So we reduce that to 4 categories because you can probably impact some category like design, because you are a developer, you produce your API, or you are a user and you want to have a specific API so you can influence the design. And you can air it, you can don't change the architecture. We've got 1 point concerning the usage and last for the logs. A little bit tricky, 7 domains, 4 categories. So it's more important to understand the way we need to produce this API grid code at the end and how we are focused to facilitate the understanding of this task. And at the end, we've got a rules. So just before I talking about US 01, that means usage 01 rules, and you've got a usage 02 rules. And each time it's very simple. It's true or false for the rules. And sometimes for some specific rules, we're talking about rate. For example, the number of users, consumer of your API. If you produce one API for each users, you can probably have many users for one API. So we are talking about a rate for this one. And if some rules is not relevant for you, you never use GraphQL, you never use event-driven architecture, you can remove these rules. But the most important thing is share these rules and explicit these rules with the person, all persona. I insist about that. And you've got a grid, a big grid. No, not so big, but you retrieve the different category to help people to understand. And you've got an evaluation note at the end. It helps you to improve your API. And if you evaluate the first time and you are the E note, it's not so important. It's not important. It just helps you to how you can improve it. And sometimes you've got many verbs in the same API, depending on your architecture. So don't go in deep dive for each rows. Take the most important rows. If you've got get, post, patch. If you've got many get, go for the evaluation for the get part. So if I give you more details about the domain and the rules, for example, for the architecture, we've got AR05. This is the first rule. Have you got a carbon footprint dashboard? Some cloud provider give you some information like Google or Microsoft, for example, Azure, and you give you some information to evaluate your impact for your API platform. It's involved more the API producer for this side, and what is impact? It's more for the network and compute. So each time for each rules, we explain the different steps and we give you some details to understand. But it's not enough. You've got the theoretical part. I give you more detailed example. So I explain you've got a dashboard for Microsoft Azure, another one for GCP, but GCP is not enough. You've got a global overview for your project. And what we need is to understand the link between your personal project for the API, for example. We've got a dedicated project inside, and we need to understand what is the impact for the compute, for the network. And we produce with Groupe Rocher a board with a data studio named Looker now to understand well what's the impact of our system. Here, it's the platform for production for the API platform on APGX. And we've got only the network part for this one because Google hosts the runtime. And when we discover to have this kind of report, we discover that everything normally should run in Europe, in Belgium or Holland. And what we discover is that we've got huge consumptions and huge CO2 emissions until August last year. And that it was just due to one component, a global component, which ran in US. And for the beginning of our project, it was not necessary to be in US, but the carbon footprint was bad due to this component. So we adapt it and we are able to reduce the impact. It's so important for this one, but it can help you, and it's important to have this kind of report. It's not enough for today because we are advanced the runtime visibility on APGX, and it should be probably the next step with the discussion with Google. My second point concerns the data exchange. I take care about the time. The data exchange, it's important to evaluate. I talk about the format, if it's JSON, XML. I don't go to the battle between the two formats, but thinking about how to produce API and how to produce a payload. If I give you a short example, you can see a little bit byte between XML and JSON. It's not so important for this part. It's small byte. But if you're thinking about volume, with one day with 2 million calls per day for this one, it's 0.17 gigabyte for the volume. And if you're thinking about 1 month with 30 days, it's 5.25 gigabytes per month. So thinking volume when you are trying to share information between systems, when you are produce your data, your payload of your applications. And zip XML, it's not so important for this one. It's only 4%. So thinking that when you produce API. The last one, the other one, it's a mix between two domains, data and data exchange. And it's a category for the design. So we've got 3 rules. And the important point is using cache, how to implement that, especially if you got an API gateway, it's very easy to do that today. I give you an example. We've got 700 shops in France for Groupe Rocher. We've got information for the opening and closing hour, and which kind of facility we've got in this shop. This information don't change every day, and probably we can take a few days to have the same information. So we can implement easily a cache system to provide information and to avoid some compute in my backend and the network exchange between my API gateway and my backend. And of course, it's involved the API producers, but for the consumers, it's important to have this information on the contract to say, take care and be careful. Sometimes the information can be cached. And what L'Oréal provide, they provide a board which gives some details about the caching performance. You got information about latency, about availability of the API services, but of course have information about the caching performance. And it's important to involve the users about that. Another point concerning the data exchange, use query parameters in your API. It can simplify or reduce the size of your payload and avoid to retrieve a lot of information in case of probably it's not necessary. If I use a small example with it allow me to retrieve information of postal address, and if I give you only 10 avenue, I can retrieve by default only 5 results, and my payload is very small. If I don't implement that, I can retrieve 100 results. And you can see if I've got a lot of calls per day on this platform, you increase the volume with, it's not necessary. And don't forget to manage the limits of your payload and give a feedback to your API consumer by this kind of best practice. And another one for Spotify, use paginations. If you want to limit the offset of the call, you can implement this kind of tools to reduce and say, I want only the 50 first result, or I want only the 20 last one, 18 in this case. And my last example concerns the logs. We catch a lot of information on the logs. Each time we've got a call, we are able to retrieve information. So we use a platform to do that. We use Elastic Platform. And it's important to identify this point at the beginning of your project. You can do that after when you are on production, but it's important to understand what's happened. But use an example to explain more better. For Groupe Rocher, we've got many brands and many countries, so we can use the same API and the same structure. And sometimes it's able to have all information millisecond by millisecond. It's important for the support, for debugging, but one day later, it's not so important to have this kind of call. And I can aggregate informations and reduce the size of my storage, reduce the size of my request when I retrieve informations. Of course, I lose information, but it's not so important. For example, here I've got a rules to average the global response time. Thinking of the byte each time you produce this kind of tools, you use this kind of tools. And here we save a lot of disk. For example, we save 4 GB per month, and it can increase very quickly. And with the tools like Elastic, I don't want to promote Elastic. Probably we can do that with Datadog or other tool, but Elastic, I know it well. It's very easy on your infrastructure as code to say, I want to keep only 35 days for this information. And this is the rules when I want to rotate my log or to aggregate information. And this is the rules for the global response time. It's only on average. It's enough for me today. So we don't start alone for this subject. I said at the beginning of the talk, we've got a lot of tools to help us for the front, for the backend, for the system, for the architecture, but not enough for the API. But we can inspire with an organization like the Institut du Numérique Responsable, Institute of Digital Responsibility. They provide a lot of rules, and it's also available in English, to help people to design system for the UX, UI, and some for the architecture, and promote some kind of architecture, like event-driven, for example, architecture. It can help you. Another source is the Green Software Foundations. The Green Software Foundations join the Linux Foundations, and they provide some information concerning the pattern to help people for the integration pattern, to find the good way or the better way to reduce impact, and for example, for the single source of truth of your data. The other one is CNUMER. It's a green IT collective, and they provide some tools to analyze your system, your applications, and evaluate the impact of your system for you. And the last one, it's EcoCode. I came from the DevOps part, and what is important for me is because today we produce some Excel sheet for evaluate the rules, slide to explain you the rules, but I want to go more deep dive and produce CI/CD tools to be able to evaluate more easily the information. And like you say, it's very simple to say if it's true or false. For the payload side, for example, we can evaluate quickly with a sandbox. And the Echo Code provides this kind of tool for the Sonar Cube for automations. I talk very fast, but I speak very fast, sorry, but what is important today, this is only the beginning of our journey. We delivered in last December this grid score, the best practice. My objective is to provide a GitHub source code to have some contributions all over the world for every people involved by this subject, and transform your API strategy with the industry's leading practices for environmental sustainability. Think about that. This QR code gives you a link to the API Thinking Collective and to this slide, to these presentations. And I hope you are interested by this subject. We need your help to improve that. Thanks a lot for your invitation.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Thank you for this quite studying and practice leader aspect of API sustainability and environmental sustainability. We have a few questions. The first one is really about what's the most difficult, let's say, dealing with the human aspect, getting sponsors, support, getting governance, getting people aligned, or was the tech aspect, like the all what you explained, the data, the caching, the request and stuff?
Both two. The tech aspect is not difficult. Today, with an API gateway, you've got tools to enable easily cache system. Before you need to compute or to program that in your backend. Today it's very easy to do that. But you need to change the mindset of people to say, don't call each time the database to retrieve information that never change. So implement this kind of rules and take time to do that. And for the governance, it's important also to say to users, we probably have another way to communicate with the API. For example, for the API, the event-driven system, to say we can only push the change information. So the both is also difficult to do that.
So it seems sometimes it's just good practice. You just take the good practice into a sustainability movement, right? But at the end, it's just at some point what we may consider a good practice, not calling a database for data that's not changing or stuff like that. So from all what you've seen, what can be considered just good practice that we just forgot and we use sustainability for that, and versus things that were really done just for sustainability, even if it's not a good practice? Do you see?
Yes, for the log part, I think it wasn't just a good practice. We discovered that because we need to migrate to another release of the platform. And the guys who make the migration, you've got a huge volume of information. You can stay in this way. And we need to stop logging and say, yes, we need to change. So it's not a good practice. No, it's a good practice. But at the beginning, it wasn't one.
Last question for the time we have, but did you happen to have, let's say, sustainability decisions on the API side who were going against the business? So you had to convince the business that it was not good for the business, or not, at least there was a compromise to do on the business to respect sustainability goals.
Yes. For example, the data, when I said, in case of I need 100 data to retrieve 100 items, in case of I want to evaluate I want to change my mobile app. And we need to say, no, don't do that. Use only the data you need today. And we change the value, we change the mobile app to include new value. So it's not only on Groupe Rocher, it's probably on the insurance and bank. And we need to say that, but this is an important point to say that is the impact. And when we're talking about payload, nobody knows what is payload. Only API developer knows that. It's a joke, but we need to explain what is impact for users also.
But when you take the example of shops, opening hours of shops, and that you may cache this because it doesn't move. But you may have some users, some customers who at really sometimes, but that may if the data is changing because of whatever national holiday or stuff like that, they may miss the fact that the shop was open or not. So then this sustainability decision, these caching decisions may have business impact, right?
Yes, of course. So
So,
you need to be clear on the contract to say, hey, take care, this data could be cached, and we need to have a discussion with API users about that. And we probably change the rules during the time, but to avoid a call to the database each time you've got an API calls, and to have only 1 or 2 updates per day, it can be enough sometimes.
It totally makes sense. So let's think more, let's say sustainability. Let's think more smartly, and especially because after your talk, we will have a track on AI, LLMs who consume a lot of resources. So let's try to make the best of both worlds. Thank you very much, Yannick, for being with us. And again, the API Green Score. And if you share your slides on whatever, Twitter or whatever, your QR code, you will be able to get to know the API Green Score and the slide deck presentation. Thank you very much, Yannick.
Thanks a lot, Mehdi. Have a nice day.